Good day, everyone. Whether you're tuning in from the continent of Africa, from the diaspora, or from anywhere else around the world, once again, welcome back to Frontline Africa. Now, let me say something before we go any further, and I'm going to say it plainly because somebody has to. American drones have taken over the skies of northern Nigeria, not partially, not temporarily, not as a symbolic gesture. They are up there right now as you're watching this, flying over Nigerian territory, gathering intelligence, recording movements, monitoring cities, towns, villages, farmlands, roads, and everything in between, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. MQ-9 Reaper drones, the same platforms that were used across the Middle East, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and right now over Yemen, are circling northern Nigeria from Bauchi airfield in the northeast. Approximately 200 American troops are on the ground operating those systems, feeding data into what they are calling intelligence fusion cell. And the Nigerian government did not just allow this. They requested it. Let that satisfy your curiosity about where this country is heading, because what I am about to walk you through today is not just about drones. It is about what those drones represent. It is about who benefits. It's about who stays silent. And it is also about what comes next, not just for Nigeria, but for the entire region. This is Frontline Africa, where we center Africa in global affairs with analysis, not emotions. Now, I am not going to waste your time going over what you already know. If you have been following this channel, you know the background story. You know about the Christmas strike in late December 2025. You know about the 16 precision-guided munitions launched from Reaper drones targeting locations in the northwestern part of the country. You know about the American president, and you know about how he described it as a Christmas present. You know about how his administration framed the entire Nigerian crisis as a targeted campaign against Christians, a framing that Nigeria's own government rejected, that security analysts rejected, and that the data itself rejected. You know all of that. We have covered it extensively. So let me skip to the part that matters right now, because something very important has shifted. And if you are not paying attention, you will miss it entirely. So stay tuned. Let me ask you something. All those voices, the senators, the members of Congress, the political commentators, the advocacy groups, the ones who were on social media every single day, posting about the persecution of Christians in Nigeria, putting out press releases, doing interviews, writing open letters, tagging every major news outlet, making it the biggest story in Washington. The same senator who introduced a resolution declaration of what has been happening in Nigeria as a genocide. The same congressional subcommittee chairs who held hearings and demanded actions. Where are they now? Where did they go? Because I have been looking and they have gone completely silent. The drones are in the air. The troops are on the ground. The fusion cell is operational, and every single one of those voices who has voiced out has moved on. Some of them are now focused on drumming up support for the ongoing conflict in Iran. Others have moved on to the next political talking point. The Christian persecution narrative, the one that dominated American political discourse about Nigeria for months, has served its purpose. The military assets are deployed. The foothold is established. Mission accomplished. On to the next assignment. And that should tell you something about what that campaign was really about. Because if it was genuinely about protecting Nigerian lives, the conversation would not have stopped, because the crisis has not stopped. If anything, it has gotten worse. And that brings me to a point I want you to sit with for a moment. Since those Christmas strikes and the February troop deployment, the security situation in Nigeria has not improved. It has deteriorated. Military positions have been overrun. Commanding officers have been killed in alarming rates. And here is the part that should disturb every single person watching this. For the first time in years, suicide bombings have returned to the northeastern state capital, the same state the American military is operating right now. A coordinated bombing attack struck a garrison town in March, killing at least 23 people and wounding over 100 others. So the American drones are in the sky over that very state. American troops are on the ground in that very state. And that very state just experienced its worst suicide bombing in years. That is not progress. That is the opposite of progress. And the 2026 Global Terrorism Index, released just days ago, confirmed the broader picture. Nigeria recorded the largest increase in terrorism deaths of any country on earth in 2025, a 46% rise, 750 people killed, terror attacks up by 43%. Nigeria now ranks 4th on the Global Terrorism Index. The American presence has not solved the problem. By every measurable standard, the situation has gotten worse since they arrived. But the voices that made all the noise, they're all gone, finished, moved on. Because the objective was never about saving lives. It was about creating the conditions for a permanent military presence. And once those conditions were met, the narrative was no longer needed. So quickly, before we continue, it has come to our attention that a significant number of our amazing viewers are not yet subscribed to the channel. So please, I need you to take a second, subscribe, and tap that notification bell for alerts, because this is the only way you can support our growth and encourage us to keep going. So, let us quickly warm up the charts. Drop where you're tuning in from and tell us, did you know that suicide bombings have returned to the very state the American military is operating from? Because that fact alone should reframe the entire conversation about what this deployment is actually achieving. Now, if that is not enough to concern you, let me take you to the next chapter, because what happened in London last week connects directly to everything I have just told you. On March 18, 2026, President Tinubu arrived in the United Kingdom for a state visit, the first by a Nigerian leader in over 3 decades. He was received at Windsor Castle by the British monarch. He attended a state banquet. He met with the British Prime Minister at 10 Downing Street, and during that visit, he said something that I want you to hear in his own words. Standing inside Windsor Castle, President Tinubu declared, and this is a direct quote here, "Our West African region faces complex terrorism challenges with roots in the Sahel. Nigeria carries an enormous responsibility to help safeguard regional stability. In confronting these threats, partnership with the United Kingdom remains essential." The way it's presented, that sounds like standard diplomatic language. But let me show you what that language does in context, because words spoken inside a former colonial capital do not exist in a vacuum. They land somewhere. And where these words land is on the alliance of Sahel states, which is Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. When the president of Africa's most populous nation stands inside Windsor Castle and tells a former colonial power that terrorism has roots in the Sahel and asks for partnership in confronting those threats, who do you think the British are looking at? Which government do you think that language points to it? Because there is only one set of governments in the Sahel that the West Africa has a problem with. And those are the 3 governments that expelled Western military forces from their territory. And here is what makes this timing worrying. That speech was delivered on March 18. The next day, which is March 19, 2026, the Global Terrorism Index was released, and it confirmed that Nigeria recorded the largest increase in terrorism fatalities anywhere on earth. Meanwhile, Burkina Faso, one of the Sahel nations that President Tinubu's language inevitably points towards, recorded the largest decrease in terrorism deaths of any nations on the planet, a 45% drop. So, the country with the worst record went to a former colonial power and framed the terrorism challenge as having roots in the region that includes the country with the best record. One of Nigeria's own opposition parties captured what millions were thinking when their spokesperson said, and I am paraphrasing here, while the president dines in London, the terrorism index confess more Nigerians have died from armed attacks under his leadership than any other time in history. Now, President Tinubu is not uninformed. He has access to the same data you and I have access to. He has intelligence briefings. He has advisors. He has numbers. So this is not about ignorance. This is about choice. And the question every African should be asking is, whose interest does that choice serve? Because when you connect it to the broader picture, a pattern emerges that is difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Let me connect the pieces for you. In 2024, the United States was expelled from its drone base in the central part of Niger. That base cost American taxpayers over $100 million. It hosted approximately 1,000 troops. It was the centerpiece of American surveillance operations across the entire Sahel region. And when Niger's revolutionary government told them to leave, they had no choice but to pack up and go. That was a historic moment. For the first time, an American nation looked the most powerful military on earth in the face and said, "Your presence here is no longer welcome." So the Americans lost their eyes in the Sahel. They lost their ability to monitor movements, track resources, and project influence across the region. And for over a year, they have been looking for a way back in. First, through Ghana, where contractor-operated surveillance flights were flying over Nigerian territory without most Nigerians knowing. And now, through Nigeria itself, with drones, troops, and a formal intelligence sharing arrangement that has no fixed end data. Both governments have confirmed that no timeline, no exit plan. So, when they tell you this is temporary, ask yourself, what exactly makes it temporary? Now, here is where it gets dangerous. If President Tinubu is framing the terrorism challenge as rooted in the Sahel, and the American military is already on Nigerian soil to fight terrorism, then the logical next step is not hard to see. At what point does the narrative shift from defending Nigeria to confronting the Sahel? Because the architecture is being assembled from multiple directions at once. On March 12, 2026, the European Parliament overwhelmingly adopted a resolution calling for the release of the former Nigerian president and the restoration of what they called constitutional order. That resolution was co-authored by a retired French general, a man who served as France's Special Operations Commander during the period of the NATO intervention that destroyed Libya in 2011, and who led the initiation of the French military operation in Mali in 2013. The very architects of the military actions that destabilized the Sahel in the first place are now sitting in the European Parliament, writing resolutions about how to fix it. Days later, President Tinubu goes to London and uses language that frames the Sahel as the root of Nigeria's terrorism challenge. And the American military is already positioned at Bauchi Airfield in the northeast of Nigeria, the closest point to the Sahel. If you cannot see what is being assembled here, I would encourage you to look again, because analysts and observers across the continent are sounding the alarm. What is being built, resolution by resolution, talking point by talking point, troop deployment by troop deployment, has all the characteristics of the groundwork for something broader. And the Nigerian president's framing, whether intentional or not, is providing the justification. Now let me zoom out one more time, because this is not just about Nigeria or the Sahel. This is about a much larger context playing out across the global south right now. If you have been following this channel, you know that we cover the ongoing conflict involving Iran closely. And some of you might ask, what does that have to do with Africa? Everything. Before this conflict escalated, Burkina Faso's defense minister visited Iran in February 2026. He met with the Iranian president and the Iranian defense minister. They signed agreements on defense, technology, and industrial cooperation. The Iranian president described Africa as a strategic priority. The Burkinabe defense minister praised Iran's ability to develop advanced defense capabilities under decades of restrictions, calling it a model of what he described as strategic self-reliance. Now, if the current conflict ends with a weakened Iran, if the forces aligned against it succeed, what happens to those defense partnerships? What happens to the military agreements the Alliance of Sahel States has been building with non-Western powers? If one of the few major nations willing to stand alongside the Sahel countries is removed from the equation, who fills that space? And if nobody fills that space, what stops the forces currently assembling the architecture for intervention from walking through the door unopposed? Right now, Russia and China are present in the Sahel. Their backing has given the Alliance of Sahel States the room to chart an independent course. And because of that, the Western powers that once operated freely across the region are now stuck outside in northeastern Nigeria, trying to figure out how to get back in. But if the global balance shifts, if the forces challenging Western dominance in the Middle East are defeated, the pressure on Africa will intensify. There will be fewer constraints, fewer counterweights, and African nations that have chosen independence will find that independence harder to defend. That is why what happens thousands of kilometers away matters directly to this continent. And this brings me to the part that is hardest to say, but it has to be said. Every serious student of African history knows that the conquest of this continent was not carried out by external forces alone. It was enabled from within. There were always those who aligned with the arriving powers in exchange for short-term advantage, opening the door to their homeland. That pattern did not disappear. It changed. Today, the tools are different. Defense agreements, financing arrangements, intelligence cells, deportation deals, but the dynamic is the same. And until we confront that honestly, we cannot break the cycle. But here is the other side. The Alliance of Sahel States is not backing down at all. They formed a mutual defense confederation. They expelled foreign military forces. They launched a joint defense force. When restrictions were imposed on their citizens, all three countries responded with identical countermeasures, and their results speak for themselves. Terrorism numbers going down while Nigerians go up. Civil society across all three countries announced coordinated mass demonstrations against the European Parliament resolution. Not government-organized, citizen-led. The message is clear. The days of external institutions dictating terms to sovereign African nations are over. So, as we close this one out, here is what I will leave you with. The drones circling northern Nigeria right now are not just machines, they are symbols. They represent a choice made not by the Nigerian people, but for them. A choice to trade sovereignty for a security arrangement that has produced no improvement in security, only the opposite. A choice to align with external powers while framing fellow African nations as the problem. And a choice to repeat patterns that have cost this continent dearly before. But the choice is not final. It never is, because the same people watching those drones fly overhead are the same people who will ultimately decide what kind of future this continent builds. And the evidence from the Sahel, from civil society, from the growing consciousness across Africa says this generation is paying attention. The question is whether they will act on what they see before the architecture becomes permanent. That is the conversation. And that is what this channel exists to have. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your analysis, not from emotion, but from a strategic place. What do you think the end game is? Because there is one, and it is being built in real time. I'll be reading your comments and featuring some of them in future episodes. So once again, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for thinking with me. If you found value in today's analysis, please do not keep it to yourself. Share it to your group chats and invite them to join us here as we break it down together. And do not forget to subscribe. My name is P. Solomon, and until next time, take care.